Orion in the Dark is the recent animated film from DreamWorks, direct to Netflix, and written by Charlie Kaufman. That Charlie Kaufman. And so I was excited, very excited actually, to read about this film coming out because I was such a fan of films like Adaptation and Being John Malkovich, and especially Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind. So I was curious about what a Kaufman script aimed at kids might be like. And having finally seen it, I think I'm still wondering a little. The film is a kid's bedtime type story that's been laid over a Kaufman-esque plot structure. Light. I think it's fair to say. And so I came away not loving or hating the film, but more wondering what the goal was and who it's for. And the clues might lie in the film itself. So let's take a look. Orion, a sensitive elementary student, has acute anxiety and a long list of things he's consequently afraid of. Some of them quite natural to be afraid of, like bees and bullies. He's also afraid of dogs, the ocean, cell phones, clowns, tall buildings, and girls. Especially his crush, Sally. And of course, then there's the big one, Orion is afraid of the dark. So one dark night, the dark, personified, presents himself to Orion to show him he's not such a bad guy after all. He strikes a deal with Orion. Spend one day at his side, seeing him at work, and Orion will be over his fear of the dark forever. And just be afraid of bees, clowns, the ocean, etc. Dark's actually got his work cut out for him with this kid. At their first stop, as they circle the world, they encounter the other night entities: sleep, insomnia, quiet, unexplained noises, and dreams. Now you can tell it's meant as a kid's film because leg cramps, flatulence, and acid reflux are not on the list. Orion, despite his promise to keep an open mind, can't help but upset the night entity's nightly rounds when he has a completely rational response to things like smothering people with pillows or hitting babies with dream hammers. It wasn't far into this plot that I began to feel a disconnect between the film's seeming intentions and its execution, and I started to feel, given Charlie Kaufman's pedigree as a great writer, that maybe I just wasn't exactly in the hands of a masterful director, who, as it turns out, is just an animator that DreamWorks promoted for this project. Where were all these promotions when I was in the film industry? Anyway, Orion starts to understand the necessity for, and even the magic of, darkness, and loses his fear of dark, eventually becoming fast friends. Well, that was easy, but the film's only half over. Not only are we going to learn tonight that darkness is actually awesome, but now we also need to learn that light isn't so warm and fuzzy after all. And it's there in the back nine of this script where Charlie Kaufman starts to earn his paycheck. The ticking clock of the movie is the celestial motion of light and dark in their eternal yin and yang orbit about the globe. And we're reminded of this every time we pause for too long because before long, here comes Mr. Sunshine over the horizon again, and if he ever catches up to dark, dark will be obliterated forever. Remember that. It's a dangling plot point that we could refer to as Chekhov's sunbeam. We're not going to, but we could. Now, trouble comes when Orion meets the embodiment of light, and he's reminded just how safe and warm daytime can make you feel compared to nighttime, thus insulting his new friend Dark and convincing the night entities that they might be better off quitting and looking for work as day entities so that people might like them more. Things get very complicated now, and that's on purpose. The second half goes full Kaufman, or at least 2/3 Kaufman, and the impossible kicks into the realm of the possible. And daytime envelops the entire globe at once, creating mayhem and confusion the world over. And a scary counter-nightmare for the night entities who quickly feel stranded and afraid of the light. Dark has now been obliterated, banished to a netherworld of Orion's memory, and Orion sits alone, also stranded and confused, in eternal sunshine. Now, in this Kaufman light tale, we still haven't found that gimmick, the maze, the gateway to the magic place that exists in some of Kaufman's other works. So we pull back and shift narrative focus so that Orion's future daughter, Hypatia, who Orion's been telling this story to apparently, suggests a solution to past Orion's conundrums. The maze here becomes one of timelines, of generations, and Hypatia joins her father's bedtime story to move it along. It was up till here that I kind of expected Kaufman to adapt himself to the needs of a simple story for kids, aimed ostensibly at helping them overcome their fears. And I will say this, the film kind of does that. But it's almost in spite of itself that it does that. You could get over your fear of the dark with this film as a kid, I guess, or at least face your fear, by introducing Dark as a character, laying out his important job, depicting that, then making him funny and fun to be around, spending time with him. But I think any writer you gave this assignment to would do at least that much. Then you have the added dimension of giving Dark a problem of his own. He's got his own self-esteem issues from years of people reacting negatively toward him. Dark has baggage, and that's sort of ingenious. I don't know if it was Kaufman, but let's give him the credit. But we still have a fairly straightforward journey going on here until these time jumps start to occur, with Hypatia joining the past. And there's one other big jump at the end. But here in the middle of the film, we're suddenly with adult Orion telling this story of how he overcame his childhood fears to his own daughter in the future, with the quintessential Kaufman touch, the absurd complication, where the basic gimmick ramps up to 11. His daughter, quite touchingly actually, goes back to assure young Orion that he gets over his fears and has a good life and becomes a good father. Now, this quells a lot of young Orion's simmering anxieties about things, especially Sally and his own abilities, and helps Orion eventually save Dark and return home. Once stuck in the past, Hypatia reads Child Orion, a poem about missing the dark, which is actually quite beautiful, and attracts the night entities back to their side, together hatching a plan to resurrect Dark and set everything right. But the plan goes sideways, and Dark slips into a black hole of fear and despair, and Orion is the only one who can face all his stored fears and rescue his friend. With that done, they must wake Orion up, send him home with Hypatia, his future daughter, who's now trapped decades in the past, and summon yet another would-be dreamer, Hypatia's future son, Tycho, to come and fly her home to her own time in his spaceship. You got all that? So what do all these inventive narrative mechanisms have to do with overcoming a fear of the dark? And was it the journey that made the difference? Was it the poem? Was it the daughter? I'm not sure. It's actually charming in parts and enjoyable in its complexity and absurdity, as many of Kaufman's stories are. He puts his intentions right there in the dialogue.
Couldn't you let it be complicated? Parents love simple stories like that because whatever problem the character has, it all gets fixed.
The only stories that help are the true ones, the complicated ones. And so he wasn't ever going to write a simple children's film. But that doesn't automatically mean it needs to be super complicated and obscure either. So it all boils down to one thing for me. You didn't need Charlie Kaufman to tackle this story. A kid's film to supposedly help them get over their fear of the dark. Now, I love Charlie Kaufman, but hiring Kaufman to write a kid's film is like hiring Hieronymus Bosch to illustrate My Little Pony, or Gustave Doré to animate Thomas the Tank Engine. He's not a bad writer, he's a legend. But he's also overkill here. We actually could have used a little bit of that Kaufman-esque magic, though, a little inventiveness in how the timelines converged. But it just seems like where Kaufman could have been used the most in his inventiveness is not where we get him. Kids might actually love the idea of a secret half floor of a building if they were old enough to watch Malkovich, or a mind-erasing machine from Eternal Sunshine, if they were old enough. Those sorts of gimmicks are such holdover ideas from everyone's childhood brain anyway. That's why we instantly connected to them as adults when we saw them. But here, we get nothing so clever. Kids love clever. With clever, they'll accept some complexity. But here we get the complexity without much clever. And all I can say is my daughter went on the carpet to play with Legos at a certain point. And although she still kept her eye on the film, she wasn't transported anywhere in the way that the best kids' films have of keeping kids engaged. Or the best Kaufman films, for that matter. For her, finding out how this story ended was purely a matter of curiosity, and mild curiosity at that, not of the necessity that a truly great story would inspire. You know who this story could have used is maybe someone like Neil Gaiman. Even his simplest kids' work like Tuesday, which basically tells the story of a young panda who, throughout the course of the storybook, might have to sneeze. It just keeps you waiting willfully with the promise of some sort of magical thing about to happen when he eventually does sneeze. And then that pays off. And it's so enjoyable for what it is. We look at that book at bedtime pretty often, and we have done for years. And we always have a good time. Will we watch Orion ever again? We're going to need a lot of Legos. The $64,000 question. Did my daughter get any closer to being less afraid of the dark? I can't say that the filmmakers earnestly had that as a goal, but she wasn't afraid of the character of dark by the end. I guess that's good. But the real darkness? It's a real conundrum. I guess we'll wait and see. But I can't say that the good in this movie outweighs those complexities that it's so proud of. You have the personification of sleep, for instance, smothering people with their own pillows, and at one point he's about to hit a child with a hammer. This is not imagery meant to alleviate stress in a kid who's already afraid at bedtime, or of any kid. This is imagery for a jaded adult audience, for the Charlie Kaufman fan. It's made ironically, not honestly, and that's kind of a shame. A Charlie Kaufman movie for kids, it doesn't seem from watching Orion in the dark that there's really any such thing. So who is this movie for? Does it hold any value or even entertainment for kids? I'd have to say very little of either. And none of that is offset by the anxiety it actually adds. So is it for parents or just adults? Well, if you don't have kids who are afraid of the dark, I don't know if you want to make it past the first act. The setup is clearly meant for kids with childhood fears. So can we say it's for families to watch together? I guess, in that something for everyone sort of way. But is that what you want out of this film? So it must be for Charlie Kaufman fans. But I can't imagine that this is the next film Kaufman would want to make for his core audience. It's definitely intended as a kids' movie. So I guess I'm saying it's just a real crapshoot who's going to enjoy this. Guys, I'd love to hear in the comments if you watched this with your children and maybe they loved it all the way through. Nothing would please me more to hear, especially if you think it helped them overcome their anxiety about bedtime or any anxieties at all. Again, I'd love to hear that I'm just being too hard on this film. Tastes vary, family tastes especially. And if Orion in the Dark rocked your world, please shout it out below. I'd love to hear it. But at our house, it was a bold experiment that just didn't pan out. So that's Orion in the Dark. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you soon.
They build a city that blocks out the stars, then they put up fake stars to look at?
That's a really profound thought, sweetie.